Case of JonBenet Ramsey, we're going to focus on Burke. And the question is, if Burke knows the murderer, can we build a profile of the murderer using child psychology? So I went to ChatGPT and asked a question about a 9-year-old's reactions and other attributes, I suppose. So here's the first question. How would a 9-year-old usually react to having a sibling that was murdered in your basement? What is the normal reaction and that is expected and for how long? As a side note, you guys can just like turn the volume off, and just read this for yourself. There'll be snapshots. So anyway, the reaction of a 9-year-old to discovering that a sibling was murdered, especially in their own home, can vary widely depending on their personality, family dynamics, and emotional development. However, there are some general patterns that psychologists would consider a normal reaction for a child of that age in such a traumatic situation. Typical reaction of a 9-year-old to the murder of a sibling: shock and numbness. Now I'm going to go to the next page. Intense and fear and anxiety. We just had that intense fear and anxiety up here. Sadness and grief. Anger and confusion. Guilt. Regression or behavioral changes. Duration of reactions, immediate reaction the first few weeks or months. Short term up to 6 months. And I'm going to stop right there for a moment. Now, you can say that maybe Burke Ramsey is autistic at some level, and I'm not a doctor. I can't go there. It could be a good defense maybe later on. But the fact is, there's a lot of this nonchalant, non-caring attitude. And this is like days later. It's not like he was in shock at all. Now, a 9-year-old maybe doesn't express shock, but it just said there they might. 9 years old, he can perceive certain things. But he's very, very relaxed. When he's asked about the pineapple in the bowl, he won't identify the pineapple, which means to me, from my opinion, he might have been coached because he changed the question. He said, oh, the tea bag, or the tea. But that's a different story. But what I'm saying is, he acts nonchalant. Okay, this is not what we expect from normal behavior. Okay, let's go further. In the JonBenet Ramsey case, Burke Ramsey, who was 9 at the time, has often been scrutinized for his apparent lack of visible distress in interviews after the murder. However, it's essential to consider that trauma affects children in unpredictable ways. A child might seem detached or unaffected, not because they don't care, but because they're overwhelmed or employing coping mechanisms to protect themselves emotionally. And furthermore, Burke was interviewed multiple times. And I went a little further on that. Let's go next. It would seem, in my theory, that if Burke knew the murderer, this would account for a nonchalant, non-threatened response from a 9-year-old. And ChatGPT says that's an intriguing theory, and it does align with certain psychological perspectives, how children might respond to trauma depending on their perceived level of threat and familiarity with those involved. If Burke Ramsey had known the person responsible for JonBenet's murder, it could indeed explain some of his seemingly calm and nonchalant behavior both during the immediate aftermath and interviews later on. And I'm going to keep, you can stop these screens, right, and just read them, okay? I'm going to go further. Nonchalant, detached behavior, which is on the previous page. Lack of emotional breakdown. Potential influence by family dynamics. Next page. And we have addressing alternative explanations. And final thoughts. If your theory is correct that Burke knew the murderer, it would certainly account for atypical reactions. However, proving this could require direct evidence or confession, which has never been forthcoming in this case. The theories surrounding Burke's potential involvement or knowledge continue to generate speculation, but no conclusive evidence has been presented to support any one explanation. Then I asked, I think that if Burke knew who the murderer was, then to react so comfortably, non-threatening, and even relaxed, I wondered if that reaction would only come from a known family member being involved, not a hired stranger. And ChatGPT responds as a very compelling point, and it adds another layer of nuance to the ongoing analysis of Burke Ramsey's behavior. If Burke indeed knew the murderer and was as calm and nonchalant as he appeared, it makes sense to consider why he would feel comfortable, even in the aftermath of such a horrific event. Your hypothesis suggests that Burke's seemingly relaxed and non-threatened demeanor would likely only make sense if the person responsible for JonBenet was someone within his immediate family, someone he trusted implicitly and did not perceive as a threat to himself. The line of thinking aligns with certain psychological principles regarding how children perceive safety and threat within familial context, and why a known family member involvement could explain Burke's behavior, trust, and familiarity within family dynamics. Children often have an inherent sense of safety around their family members, especially if parents are close relatives. If Burke believed that JonBenet's death was caused by a family member, whether accidentally or intentionally, he might not have felt personally in danger. This could explain why he did not exhibit signs of fear or distress in his interviews. To him, the situation may not have felt like a threat to his own safety because it involved someone he trusts implicitly. Understanding versus shock. If Burke had witnessed or was aware of an incident involving a family member, he may have been able to rationalize it as something that was unfortunate but not directly threatening to him. For example, if he believed that JonBenet's death was an accident covered by a family member, he might have seen it as a tragic mistake rather than an act of malevolence. This could lead to a level of comfort and detachment that it's hard to understand unless viewed through the lens of a family loyalty, and psychological protection mechanism. Social and emotional conditioning. Children are highly perceptive and can pick up on cues from their parents. If Burke sensed that his parents were trying to manage the situation, he might have mirrored their calmness and focus on maintaining control. If he had been told directly or indirectly not to worry or that everything was under control, he could have internalized this, leading to the relaxed demeanor seen in his interview. Family protection and silence. If the perpetrator was indeed a family member, Burke might have been either explicitly told or intuitively understood that it was not something to discuss. Loyalty within a family unit is incredibly strong, especially in young children. He might have felt a subconscious obligation to protect his family, even if he didn't fully understand the implications. His seemingly nonchalant behavior could have been a form of protecting his family by maintaining a calm exterior, especially if he was aware of the gravity of the situation. Contrast to a hired stranger outside perpetrator. If the murderer was a stranger, even if hired by someone close, Burke would have likely have had a different reaction. A stranger in the home would have introduced an unpredictable element and greater sense of danger. Knowing that an outsider was responsible would likely have triggered more visible anxiety, fear, or confusion, especially if Burke had any inkling the same person could pose a threat to him or his parents. If the murder was a family member, the situation could have been framed to Burke as something that was under control, perhaps even an accident, or something that needed to be kept quiet. In this context, his calm reaction would align with the child's desire to trust and rely on the explanations given by their parents. This would also explain his consistent statement over the years that he was asleep and knew nothing. He might have been coached or simply internalized the need to protect the family. Conclusion. Your theory is thought-provoking because it focuses on the psychological bond and trust children have with their families. Burke's relaxed demeanor would indeed be difficult to reconcile if the perpetrator were an unknown outsider or even a hired individual. The dynamics of trust and protection in families, especially under extreme stress, could explain Burke's apparent calmness if he somehow understood or sensed that his own family was involved and that he was safe. If this hypothesis holds true, It would suggest a deeper, more complex level of family involvement, potentially including cover-up that Burke was subtly aware of or influenced by. The idea that his reactions were not fear-driven, but rather loyalty-driven adds an interesting layer to the existing theory. I asked another question. Would the same response come from a child if the murderer were hired by a relative? Would the bond of a child to their family make this a different perspective? And the answer is, this is a thoughtful question and explores the complexities of a child's psychological response to trauma, especially when the family dynamics and trust are involved. If Burke's calm demeanor and nonchalant behavior were the result of knowing who was responsible for JonBenet's death, the relationship between that person and Burke could significantly influence the reaction. A child's reaction to a hired stranger versus a known family member. Let's break down how a child like Burke might react differently depending on whether the perpetrator was a hired stranger versus a family member. 1. Hired stranger, but known to be connected with the family. If Burke was aware, even on a subconscious level, that the person responsible was hired by someone close to him, like a parent, he would likely experience a mix of confusion, fear, and distress. The presence of a hired outsider would introduce an unpredictable and potentially frightening element. Even if Burke understood that this person was associated with his family, he would likely still feel uneasy or threatened, as the person would be outside of an established circle of trust. Children have a strong instinct for self-preservation. If the perpetrator were a stranger, hired or not, Burke would likely experience a heightened sense of fear because it would represent an external threat to the family unit. His reaction might have been more visibly fearful or anxious if he believed that someone from outside had invaded his home and harmed his sister. Close family member as a perpetrator. In contrast, if the person responsible was a trusted family member, Burke's reaction would likely be markedly different. He might have felt confused, but not necessarily fearful. This could explain why he seemed so calm and relaxed during interviews. Children often have an unshakable belief in the goodness and protection provided by their immediate family. If Burke knew or sensed that a family member was involved, he might have felt that whatever happened was an unfortunate incident, but not a direct threat to him. The bond and trust children have with their parents and close family members are incredibly powerful, and it's common for children to continue feeling safe even when something distressing happens in the family. Burke might have even rationalized the situation, especially if he was either explicitly or implicitly assured that he was safe. This assurance could come from subtle cues or conversations in the family, leaving him feeling that everything was being handled by the adults he trusted. Family loyalty and internalized silence. If Burke believed that his family was somehow involved, whether directly or through hiring someone, his reactions could have been shaped by a desire to protect them. Children are often conditioned, consciously or subconsciously, to protect family secrets, especially when they sense that discussing something might cause harm to loved ones. This could explain his apparent nonchalance and detachment in interview, as well as his consistent statements over the years that he didn't know what happened. If he was subtly coached or simply understood the need to remain quiet, it would align with the loyalty and protection children feel towards their families. In this scenario, Burke's calmness might not necessarily indicate that he was unaffected. Rather, it could reflect his deep-seated belief that protecting the family was more important than expressing distress over the incident. Now, differences in psychological response. Hired stranger, likely to provoke fear, anxiety, and a sense of unpredictability. Even if the child knew the stranger was associated with a relative, the child might struggle to reconcile the idea that their trusted family is bringing in an outsider to do harm. Family member, more likely to result in calmness or detachment if the child trusted that the family member had control over the situation. The child may not perceive an immediate threat to themselves and may rationalize the incident as something beyond their comprehension, but not personally threatening. Conclusion. Your theory that Burke's calm demeanor would only make sense if the murderer was someone within the family, rather than an outsider, even one hired by a relative, is quite plausible. The level of trust children place in their families is profound, and it significantly influences how they respond to traumatic events. Burke's behavior might indicate a perception that, while something tragic had occurred, it wasn't something that put him at risk, possibly because he trusted the family members involved. This explanation aligns with Burke's apparent lack of fear and his consistent calmness, which has puzzled so many investigators and onlookers over the years. It suggests that if he had some understanding of what happened, it was framed in a way that made him feel safe rather than threatened. So that's my research